Okay. So, today I'm going to be doing something very, very new and brand new. I'm going to be reading chapter 1 today. And then after I get done with that, the notes will be taken from that point forward. So, this is the book. And now, I'm going to be reading chapter 1, praying and hoping that it's a short chapter. The thing with this is, if the information is subjective, you can read a paragraph and basically pull out what parts of the paragraph to put in by remembering what you have read. Like when I prepare for my videos, part of that preparation is research, online research that I do. And I read the paragraphs and I remember what is said in those paragraphs. I pull out a couple details from those paragraphs, and I can do that. The same goes for my imaginative astrology short. So I read an article and read paragraphs and remember what is said in that paragraph. Not the same for objective information. With objective information, you read it and then immediately forget it. So what's the point of trying to remember what to say? So instead, I'm going to read through chapter 1, and then I'm going to go through it again and pull out a couple details from each paragraph and jot them down. Let us begin. And I'll try to do more live streams in the future. Definitely not for my general astrology videos because I want those videos to be more official. But maybe I will do more live streams for the weekly astrology videos. Who knows? That would be really, really fun. But I wish I could say that I was more excited because you know how many live streams I've made in the past and deleted? Thousands upon thousands. And so that taints and purifies and discontents making live streams. But anyway, the past is in the past. Let's move forward. So I'm going to turn, and I don't even have to look in the table of contents to find the chapter because it is chapter 1. To the instructor. We don't need to know all this information. Student. Let me see how many pages this chapter is before reading it. It's probably a lot of pages. Yes, it is. Oh yeah, we're going to be here for a good long stay unless it says chapter. Yeah, okay. It's quite a bit of pages to get through, so please bear with me as I read it. And I've never read this before. This is the very, very first time reading this, so let's see how it goes. Okay. Chapter 1 is What is Biological Anthropology? When the call came, it was a dream come true. Throughout college, graduate school, and my career as a professor, I have been fascinated by what human remains from past societies tell us about the people who lived in them, the challenges they faced, what their diet and nutrition were like, their health and lifestyle, and the ways they adapted to the conditions where they lived. This interest is why I began my studies of biological anthropology in the first place. The discipline of biological anthropology focuses on how humans adapt and evolve in all times and in all places, from our earliest ancestors up to the present, looking ahead to our species' future. Specifically, from the time I was a graduate student, my research has looked at the transition within the past 10,000 years from a life way in which humans primarily ate wild plants and animals to maybe this is easier, I thought it would be better. This is a big book. To one in which they raise crops, to one in which they raise crops as their main food sources. These are big paragraphs, let me tell you. They're not short paragraphs. And that's the thing. With the things I read, they're shorter, reasonable paragraphs. I just want to show you how massive and gigantic the paragraphs in this book are. They are big enchilada paragraphs. So it'll be very, I'm anxious to pull out details from these paragraphs. I really am. So, moving on. So I'm just going to start at the top of page 4 now. So this dramatic shift from one kind of diet to another provided the context for the evolution of new disease-causing pathogens and the appearance of new infectious diseases that resulted in challenges to health and nutrition and in other detrimental impacts, as well as changes or lifestyle as people began to live in settled, sometimes crowded communities. In short, the shift from collecting and hunting foods to farming introduced a host of new challenges for our species. My research has sought to uncover more about or how we have evolved and adapted in response to new foods and new ways of acquiring them. To study this question, I have had to explore settings in the world home, where our home, where our human ancestors faced these challenges. Among these settings was a place called Catterick. I'm not going to even try to pronounce that. The site of one of the earliest cities in the world located in south central Turkey. Two people who lived in the city were among the world's earliest farmers. The people who depended on domesticated plants and animals for sustaining life. Decades of archaeological research at the site has yielded evidence of more than a 1,000-year presence of this ancient city, including some of mud-brick houses closely packed together and the skeletons of the people who had lived and worked there and who had been buried below the floors of the houses following their deaths. Catterick was founded by a few families and expanded into a full-blown city, with its population peaking at some 5,000 to 8,000 women, men, and children. These people grew crops of wheat, barley, and other domesticated plants, and they herded sheep and cattle. Those resources, in addition to wild plants, collected and animals hunted, sustained the community over centuries. Catterick's rich history made it an enormously fascinating place to me. So it was one of the happiest days of my professional life when, while attending a conference in England, I was contacted by archaeological Ian Hodder, the director of the excavations at Catterick to ask if I would be interested in healing the study of human remains being recovered at the site. We arranged a meeting at the conference during which he described what the project was accomplishing, its goals, and its interest to understanding the people who lived there, what they ate, what their nutritional health was like, kinship patterns, what their relationships were like, in addition to other unanswered questions about the community dating back thousands of years ago. I could not imagine a better setting for addressing my own research questions about the social, behavioral, and health impacts of one of the most important transitions in human history. These questions included: how did the people change biologically over time? What caused these changes? What were the key factors underlying the experience of living in the vast flat plains of the region? How can we measure human resilience and change over time? What did the people at Catterick do when resources were scarce? The other scientists and scholars Hutter recruited for the project included specialists who study food remains of plants and animals, architecture and building, history, arts, and many other areas that collectively provide the context for the study of human adaptation, health, and well being in a critical period of human evolution. So important, in fact, that the setting reveals the foundation for what was to come in later human evolution, including today's complete dependence on domesticated plants and animals and the adoption of highly sedentary lifestyles. This later transition has led to significant health outcomes for our species, including especially the rise of infectious diseases associated with population crowding, a trend that continues to the present day with a range of newly emerging infectious diseases. I vividly recall my reaction to seeing Catterick for the first time. I had traveled thousands of miles from my home in Ohio to Turkey after a sequence of long flights to Istanbul and then to Konya. We took the final trek to the site. I was the first to see it in the distance. A gigantic mound, some 20 m in height, and with its base um, encompassing the equivalent of 25 American football fields. The massive mound dominated the flat landscape, covered by wheat fields of the Konya plain of south-central Turkey. I knew immediately that our team was about to engage in an incredibly exciting process of discovery, in which we would seek answers in questions that had consumed me since my days as a college student. Over the course of nearly 2 decades of fieldwork and research, our team's excavations yielded hundreds of Catterick skeletons. The team consisted of leading experts in the study of the skeletons, including ancient DNA for determining biological readiness, stable isotopes, patho- um, paleopathology, skeletal biomechanics, skeletal growth and development, injury from interpersonal violence, and many other areas of investigation. Our collective research detailed the rise of a community and the health impacts of living in a close, crowded setting where refuse from animals and food debris were discarded next to homes. That sentence is not grammatically correct. Our stable isotope studies revealed that over the 1,000-year history of the city, food and other resources became increasingly depleted close to the community, resulting in the inhabitants having to herd sheep and gather resources farther and farther from the city. Our research group's biomechanical analysis of the human skeletons showed that all members of the community, both adults and children, worked hard and became increasingly mobile, walking greater and greater distances over time. Importantly, the science revealed that biological changes in the community were an ongoing process that involved major adaptations, cost to health and well-being, intra-community interactions, and biological adjustments to an increasing workload caused by moving to a diet based on domesticated plants and animals. This research is just one example of the fascinating avenues you can pursue within biology and anthropology, but there are countless others. The temporal and geographic coverage of biological anthropology is so broad and so diverse because the field addresses big picture issues about the history and biology of the human experience. What we were in the past, who we are today, and what we may become in the future. Biological anthropologists seek answers to fundamental questions about our biology and evolution. That's an important detail right there. As with any scientific pursuit, getting answers to these questions is often difficult. These questions motivate biological anthropologists to spend months in the deserts of central Ethiopia, finding and studying the remains of human ancestors who lived thousands or even millions of years ago in the jungles of Uganda, studying our closest primate relatives, or in the high altitude regions of the Andes Mountains, studying the living inhabitants and the responses and long term adaptations to low oxygen and extreme cold, to name just a few of the settings you will learn about in this book and in your class, whatever the term may be. In this chapter, we will explore in more detail the nature of biological anthropology and its subject matter. Hello? Okay, this sound is working. I'm going to actually stop there because I can feel my mouth getting a little bit dry, so I'm going to take a really, really quick break, get something to drink, and then come back. Okay, sorry about that. So, moving on to the next section. And this is where it gets important. That was the. I should not have read the introduction. Because it's basically the author's background to the whole thing. Good grief. I didn't even know. I thought it was infused with the whole book. Anyway, I read it. It's there. It's live. It's out there. I can't change it. All I can do is move on. And in future, I will try to steer away from reading the introductions as I go through this book. So, Section 1. What is anthropology? Very, very important, very big question. Let's read and find out. Now, this is where it gets to the good stuff. This is the meat and potatoes, as they say, right, starting right here. So this is where I will start to take notes from. So, what is anthropology? Now it really gets dry. When human explorers first undertook transcontinental travel, or transoceanic voyages to faraway lands, they encountered people who looked, talked, dressed, and behaved very differently from themselves. When these travelers returned to their home countries, they described the peoples and cultures they saw. Building on these accounts, early scholars speculated on the relationships between humans living in Europe and those encountered in distant places. Eventually, later scholars developed new ideas about other cultures, resulting in the development of the discipline of anthropology. Before proceeding, I should add that during its formative years, anthropology was enmeshed with obsidian colonialism, with early anthropologists accompanying colonial expeditions in study, describe, and categorize religious cultures. These studies often reflected Eurocentric biases and reinforced colonial narratives of superiority. Although the discipline has since evolved, we will see that it continues to grapple with this historical legacy. Anthropology is the study of humankind, viewed from the perspective of all people and all times. As it is practiced in the US, it includes 4 branches of subdisciplines: cultural anthropology, archaeology, linguistic anthropology, and biological anthropology. Cultural anthropologists study present-day societies in global settings. Culture defined as learned behavior that is transmitted from person to person in the unifying theme of study in cultural anthropology. Archaeologists study earlier human societies, focusing mostly on their material remains, such as animal and plant remains in places where people lived in the past. Archaeologists are best known for their study of material objects, artifacts from past cultures, and weaponry and ceramics. Archaeologists study the processes behind past human behavior, for instance, why people lived where they did, while some societies were simple and others complex, and why people shifted from hunting and gathering to agriculture beginning more than 10,000 years ago. Archaeologists are in the colonial anthropologists of the past. They seek to resemble cultures of the past as though those cultures were alive today. Oh my goodness, it's a pain for me to have to. I'm gonna have to hold it up like this. So sorry if I'm blocking the view. I'm just trying to figure out the most efficient way to go about doing this. Linguistic anthropologists study the construction and use of language by human societies. Language, defined as a set of written or spoken symbols that refer to things other than themselves, makes possible the transfer of knowledge from one person to the next and from one generation to the next. A subfield popular among linguistic anthropologists is sociolinguistics, the investigation of language's social context. Biological anthropologists study all aspects of present and past human biology. As we will explore in the next section, biological anthropology deals with the evolution and variation among human beings and their living and past relatives. No anthropologist is expected to be an expert in all four branches of the discipline. Anthropologists in all four areas and with very different interests, however, acknowledge the diversity of humankind in all contexts. No other discipline embraces the breadth of the human condition in this manner. In fact, this remarkably diverse discipline differs from other disciplines in its commitment to the notion that, unlike other animals, humans are biocultural, both biological and cultural beings. Anthropologists are interested in the interrelationship between biology and culture. Anthropologists call this focus the biocultural approach. Anthropology also differs from other disciplines in emphasizing a broad comparative approach to the study of biology and culture, looking at all people and their ancestors in all cultures and all times and all places. Anthropologists are interested in people, their ancestors, and their living and past biological relatives. Wherever or whenever they lived, simply you are studying a field that is holistic, unlike any you have studied before. Mikey Ticket to Moon 1. That's what I'm thinking. Anthropology is a remarkably diverse discipline and has considerable overlap among its sub-disciplines. For instance, many anthropologists pursue a biomedical path, combining their knowledge of health and disease and collaborating with doctors and other health professionals to address serious issues involving new and returning epidemic diseases. In this regard, medical anthropologists are key figures in addressing disease outbreaks in a range of settings worldwide, such as in remote communities in West Africa hit hard first by the Ebola virus and then coronavirus outbreaks over the past 2 decades. What? That hasn't been going on for decades, so that piece of information is definitely wrong. Simply, the knowledge of health in its larger cultural context gives the discipline a unique perspective on the importance of the interlinkages between our well-being and the myriad culturally based on behavior and influence it. You will learn about health connections throughout the text, including but not limited to disease, growth and aging, and the diet and the challenges to health associated with global warming. So then it goes on. How am I doing on the chat? Let's see if anybody said anything in the chat. Nope, not yet. That's how few followers that I have now. I film my videos like I have way more followers than I do. And so too are my Instagram stories. Don't forget about that. Okay, so anyway, moving on to the section 2. What is biological anthropology? Now it gets more specific. The short answer to this question is biological anthropology is the study of human biological evolution and human biocultural variation. Two key concepts underline the definition. First, every person is a product of evolutionary history, or all the biological changes that have brought humanity to its current form in the 21st century. The remains of past human-like beings, or hominins, indicate that the earliest human ancestors first appearing in Africa date to around 6 to 8 million years ago. Since that time, the physical appearance of hominins and their descendants, including modern humans, have changed dramatically. Our physical appearance, our intelligence, and everything else that makes us distinctive biological organisms evolved in our predecessors, whose genes led to the species we are today. Second, each of us is the product of our own individual life history. From the moment you were conceived, your biological makeup has been determined mostly by your genes. Your biological makeup is also strongly influenced by your environment. Environment here refers not just to the obvious factors such as climate, but also to everything that has affected you. The physical activities you have engaged in, the foods you have eaten, and the nutrition those foods provide. Experience. 2. Infectious diseases and the pathogenic viruses and bacteria that cause them, and many other factors that affect overall health and well-being. Environment also includes social and cultural factors. A disadvantaged social environment, such as one in which infants and children receive poor quality nutrition, can result in negative consequences such as poor health, reduced growth and height, and shortened life expectancy. The people who lived at Catterick lived at a time when their diets were dominated by domesticated plant dietary carbohydrates, such as wheat and barley, following the times when their ancestors ate non-domesticated plants subsequent to the shift from foraging to farming. Because of the carbohydrate-enriched diet, people had a significant number of cavities. Therefore, each person's conditions reflects two key characteristics or two key circumstances, namely the millions of years of human evolution and the more immediate circumstances such as their individual diet, exposure to disease, and the stresses day-to-day living. The next subsection is, what do biological anthropologists do? Let's find out. Biological anthropologists routinely travel to places throughout the U.S. and around the world to investigate populations, both living and deceased. Some biological anthropologists study living people, whereas others study extinct and living species of our nearest biological relatives, primates such as lemurs, monkeys, and apes. I am among the biological anthropologists who travel to museum collections and archaeological localities to study human biology in past societies. When I tell people outside the field what I do for a living, they often think biological anthropology is quite old, bizarre even. Frequently they asked, why would anyone want to study dead people and old bones and teeth? American biological anthropologist Tiffany Tung provides a good answer to this question. Skeletons tell us a considerable amount about a person when they were alive. Biological anthropologists study bones and teeth because they are a time capsule, telling the story of the person's life experiences, including the age of a person when they died, their sex, their diet, their stresses, injuries, and where they go from. Biological anthropologists place that person in their larger society and living circumstances. Everyone has heard of physics, chemistry, and biology, but the average person has never heard of biological anthropology. Compared with other areas of science, biological anthropology is small, but smallness does not mean unimportance. Biological anthropology is practical and significant, providing answers to fundamental questions that scholars and scientists have asked for centuries, such as who are we as a species? What does it mean to be human? Where do we come from? What are some populations relatively healthy, whereas others are not? Why is there inequity, um, especially in the ability to access nutritious foods and other resources for human beings in the past and the present? Moreover, biological anthropology plays a vital role in addressing questions that are central to our society, sometimes involving circumstances that all of us wish had never come about. For example, the tragedy that Americans identify as 9/11 called immediately for the assistance of specialists from a branch of biological anthropology called forensic anthropology. Biological anthropology is as practiced in the US began in the first half of the 20th century, especially under the guidance of three key figures: German-born Franz Boas for American anthropology generally, Czech-born Ale Hardkia, who started the professional scientific journal and professional society devoted to the field, and Ernest Houghton, who trained most of the first generation of biological anthropologists during the first half of the 20th century. Theories and methods of biological anthropologists today have changed greatly since the early 1900s. Whereas early biological anthropologists were interested in human biology, the field is very different today than it was even 20 years ago. Although there are similarities in the subjects explored, contemporary research brings fresh perspectives on genetic diversity, the availability of food and resources, patterns of migration, and the history of our biological lineage. These modern topics reflect a significant departure from the initial concepts and expectations of the field's pioneers. In large part, the current field is based on evolutionary biology, much of which is studied in cultural, social, and behavioral contexts. Biological anthropologists study all aspects of human biology, specifically looking at the evolution and variation of human beings and their living and past relatives. This focus on biology means that biological anthropologists practice a biological science, but they also practice a social science. In that, they study biology within the context of culture and behavior. Depending on their areas of interest, biological anthropologists might examine molecular structures, bones and teeth, blood types, breathing capacity and lung volume, genetics and genetic history, infections and other types of disease, origins of language and speech, nutrition, reproduction, growth and development, aging, primate origins and evolution, primate social behavior, biomechanics of bones, brain biology, migration, and many other topics dealing with variation in both the living and the dead, sometimes the bones and teeth of the very long dead. In dealing with such topics, biological anthropologists apply methods and the theories to develop in other disciplines as well as in their own as they answer questions that help us understand who we are. A point that I will raise and that you will see throughout this book. The very nature of the discipline and the constant borrowing of other disciplines means that biological anthropologists practice an interdisciplinary science. For instance, they might draw on the work of geologists who study the landforms and layering of deposits of soil and rock and tell us where humans live. Or they might obtain information from paleontologists who study the evolution of plants and animals in the distant past and thus provide the essential context for understanding the world in which earlier humans lived. Some biological anthropologists are trained in chemistry so they can analyze the chemical properties of bones and teeth to determine what kinds of foods those earlier humans ate, or to learn about living humans adapt to reduced oxygen settings, such as in the high altitudes of the Peruvian Andes. Biological anthropologists might work with psychologists, physiologists who study the ability of the lungs to absorb oxygen. Some biological anthropologists study ancient genomes and draw conclusions about transmission patterns and infectious diseases or migration of humans. The firm yet flexible identity of their science allows biological anthropologists to gather data from other disciplines in order to address key questions. Questions drive what they do. How many pages do we have left of this belonging chapter? Okay, not too many pages left. So I'll read the next section and then I'll take a break for another drink. So, section 1.3, what makes humans so different from other animals? The 6 steps to humanness. Human beings clearly differ from other animals. From humanity's earliest origin, when an ape-like primate began walking on 2 feet, to the period beginning around about 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, when modern climates and environmentalists emerged after what is commonly known as the Ice Age. 6 key attributes developed that make us unique: hybridialism, non-honing chewing, complex material culture and tool use, hunting, speech, and dependence on domesticated foods. The first development represents the most profound physical difference between humans and other animals, namely, the manner in which we get around. We are committed to bipedalism, that is, walking on 2 feet. The next development was a loss of a large honing canine tooth, like the one that apexes typically use to shred their food, replaced by the simple non-honing canine. with which we process food in ways that are unique to humans. Some authorities argue that our ancestors' honing canine disappeared due to a changed diet. The changes involved canine reduction and loss of honing function in early hominins occurring around 55 million. Today, our species completely depends on culture, and essentially material culture, for its day-to-day living and its very survival. Culture is a complex human characteristic that facilitates our survival by enabling us to adapt to different settings. Material culture is a part of culture that is repressed as material objects that humans use to manipulate environments. For example, hammers and nails are forms of material culture that enable us to make cabinets, tables, automobiles, refrigerators, and countless other forms of material culture. The material remains of past cultures go back hundreds of thousands of years to the first simple tools made from rocks. These tools date to 2.6 million from East Africa. Material culture today makes our lifestyles possible. Can you imagine your life without it? We could survive without modern additions to material culture such as cars, computers, television sets, plumbing, and electricity as our ancestors did before the past century. But what about living without basic material culture, such as houses and clothing, especially in climates where it can be very, very cold in the winter? Without material culture, how would any of us get food and other resources? The answer to both questions is simple. We could not make it without technology to regulate temperature, to acquire food, and so on. Some societies are much less technologically complex than others, but no society functions without any technology. Anthropologists and animal behaviorists have shown that human beings are not, however, the only type of animal that has or can employ material culture. Primatologists have observed some chimpanzee societies in Africa, for instance, making simple tools from twigs. In laboratories, chimpanzees have been taught to use physical symbols that approximate human communication. Still, these and other forms of material culture used by non human species are nowhere near as complex as those created by us. The other three factors of humanness, hunting, speech, and dependence on domesticated foods appeared much later in human evolution than bipedalism, non honing, chewing, and complex material culture and tool use. Hunting here refers to the social behavior whereby a group of individuals, adult males in general, organize themselves to pursue animals for food. This behavior likely dates back to a million or more years ago. Some non human primates, such as chimpanzees, organize to pursue prey, but they do not use tools or travel long distances as humans distinctively do when they hunt. An equally distinctive human behavior is speech. We are the only animal that communicates by talking. Unfortunately, for research purposes, recording and listening technologies was invented only about a century ago. For information about long path speech, anthropologists rely on indirect evidence within the skeleton, the leg skeleton, for example. The hyoid bone is part of the vocal structure that helps produce words. The unique appearance of the human hyoid helps anthropologists conjecture about the origins of speech in earlier human ancestors. The most recently developed behavior that is unique to us is the domesticated manner in which we acquire our food. About 10,000 to 12,000 years before the present, humans began to raise animals and grow plants. This development led eventually to our current total reliance on domesticated plants and animals for food. This reliance has had a profound impact on human biology and behavior, and it represents a fundamental part of our biological. So I'm going to be right back, and I'm going to get a drink, and we'll be directly back. Okay, I'll be back. All right. So now moving on to section 4, which is the last section of this book, which is only a couple pages. And then we'll take notes. Okay. Section 4, how we know what we know, the scientific method. How do biological anthropologists and other scientists make decisions about what their subject matter means? Specifically, how do we know what we know about human evolution and human variation? Like all other scientists, biological anthropologists carefully and systematically observe and ask questions about the natural world around them. These observations and questions form the basis for underlying problems and gathering evidence, data that will help answer questions and solve problems. That is, fill gaps in scientific knowledge about how the natural world operates. These data are used to test hypotheses, possible explanations for the processes under study. Scientists observe and then reject or accept these hypotheses. This process of determining whether ideas are right or wrong is called the scientific method. The scientific method is the foundation of science. It is the basis for all discovery of how the natural world works. The concept of the scientific method is so important that I regard it as among the most fundamental concepts in this book, in the field this book represents, and in your course of study in science generally. Science, then, is more than just knowledge or facts about the natural world. Science is also much more than technical details. Certainly, facts and technical details are important in developing answers to questions, but facts and technical skills are not science. Rather, science is a process that provides new discoveries that connect our lives with the world we live in. It is a way of knowing through observation of natural phenomena. This repeated acquisition results in an ever-expanding knowledge base built from measurable, repeatable, and highly tangible observations. In this way, science is empirical or based on observation or experiment. After the systematic collection of observations, the scientific develops a theory, an explanation as to why a natural phenomenon takes place. For many non-scientists, a theory is simply a guess or a hunch, but for a scientist, a theory is not just some stab at an explanation. Rather, a theory is an explanation grounded in a great deal of evidence, or what a lawyer calls the evidentiary record. A scientist builds a case by identifying incontrovertible facts. To arrive at these facts, the scientist examines and re-examines the evidence, putting it through many tests. The scientist then uses observations, documentation, and testing to generate hypotheses and eventually to construct a theory based on those hypotheses. Hypotheses explain observations, predict the results of future investigation, and can be refuted by new evidence. For example, the great English naturalist Charles Robert Darwin developed the hypothesis that the origin of human bipedalism was linked to the shift from life in the trees to life on the ground. Darwin's hypothesis was based on his own observations of human walking. Other scientists then limited observations of non-human primate behavior, and other scientists anatomical evidence or information about structure makeup drawn from dissections in the case of apes. Darwin's hypotheses led to an additional hypothesis itself based on evidence accumulated over decades and widely believed for the subsequent century and a half that the first hominids arose in the open grasslands of Africa from some ape-like animals that was formerly arboreal, that is, had once lived in trees. Okay, next page. Support for Darwin's hypotheses about human origins, and in particular the origin of bipedal locomotion, began to erode in 2001 when a group of scientists discovered early hominids dating from 5.8 to 5.2 Mia in the modern country of Ethiopia. Contrary to expectation and accepted wisdom, these hominids had lived not in grasslands but in woodlands. Moreover, unlike modern humans, whose fingers and toes are straight because we are fully terrestrial, we live on the ground. The early hominids had slightly curved fingers and toes. The physical shape and appearance, what biological anthropologists call morphology, of the hominid's finger and toe bones indicate a lot of time spent in trees, holding onto branches and moving from limb to limb. These findings forced scientists to reject Darwin's hypothesis to toss out what had been a fundamental tenet of biological anthropology. The story does not end here with the understanding that the earliest hominids lived in forests. Instead, this new hypothesis generates new questions. For example, why did the earliest hominids arise in a wooded setting, and why did they come out of the woods as time went on? Later in this book, we will consider these and other questions. For now, the point is that science is a self-correcting approach to knowledge acquisition. Scientists develop new hypotheses as new findings are made. Scientists use these hypotheses to build theories, and like the hypotheses that underlie them, theories can be modified or even replaced by better theories depending on findings made through meticulous observation. As new observations are made and hypotheses and theories are subjected to the test of time, science corrects itself. A scientific law is a statement of irrefutable truth of some action or actions occurring in the natural world. Among the few scientific laws, the most well known are the laws of gravity, thermodynamics, and motion. But scientific truth seldom gets finalized into law. Rather, truth is continually developed. Scientists discover new facts and gain new understandings about natural phenomena. Unlike theories, scientific laws do not address the larger questions as to why a natural action or actions take place. As our group began our study of human remains from Catterick, our hope was to collect data and develop understandings that would enable us to test hypotheses about human evolution and human variations in the world's earliest cities. Once we completed the months of arduous field work and the years of laboratory investigations on the remains of the fields uncovered, we had answers to questions. The scientific method guided our studies and provided answers to questions about who we are today in the period of human beings' most recent evolution. Our lives in the early 21st century were shaped by developments taking place long before. That is it. That is the full chapter 1 in its entirety. Now let's go back to the very beginning of the chapter, to the introduction section, section 1, and let us take notes. So this is how these sessions will work. Read it and then take notes. Because if I were to just read it, and then not take notes, I would completely forget about the information. There's no meaning with that. What's the point of reading it if you're going to completely forget about it? So that's why we're taking notes. Okay, so paragraph numero uno. The detail that I will be extracting from this paragraph is and that was easy. Anthropology is the study of humankind viewed. Wait, that's the next paragraph. Okay, we'll worry about that when we get there. Okay, so the first paragraph. So the detail is building on these accounts. Early scholars speculated on the relationships between humans living in Europe and those encountered in distant places. Now, the second detail, which is very, very important. Anthropology is the study of humankind viewed from the perspective of all people and all times. Moving on to the next paragraph, which is basically one sentence, so I can copy that down. Cultural anthropologists study present day societies in global settings. And I realize there's two sentences there. Okay. So now moving on to the next paragraph. Archaeologists study the process behind past human behaviors. The next paragraph. Language makes, should probably put the whole thing because it's important. Language is defined as a set of written or spoken symbols that refer to things other than themselves, which is very interesting. Makes possible the transfer of knowledge from one person to the next and from one generation to the next. Next paragraph. The very, very first sentence from that paragraph is biological anthropologists study all aspects of present and past human biology. So anthropologists are interested in the interrelationship, probably spelled that wrong, between cultural beings. Interrelationship between biology and culture, which they call the biocultural approach. You have to be detached and not be so caught up on, oh, this detail has to be the most important. Extract any detail from the text. That's how we're going to go about this. That's the only way to go about this, because again, you cannot read a piece of objective information and expect to remember it. I'm going to tell you right now, you're going to read it and then you're going to forget it. That's just how it is, because it's objective. So you have to, the only way to go about remembering the information and taking notes on the information is by jotting it down as you go along, jotting information from paragraphs as I read it, not expecting yourself to remember the information from the paragraphs that you read, because let's face it, you won't remember it. That's the point that I want to make loud and clear. So I thought that I would get on my soapbox there. So that they call this focus the biocultural approach. And then it goes into a very, very long paragraph after that. So we can move on to section 2. Okay. So what I can actually do is I can put the title, what is biological anthropology, and then answer. The study of human biological evolution, and human biocultural variation. Correct by spelling. And I mean, the argument is, why should you have to rack your brain in order to remember the pieces of information, honestly? It's not worth the mental energy and strain to try to remember stuff, because you won't remember it. You just will not remember it. You'll read it and you'll forget it. So, see if anyone's typed anything in the chat. No. Again, I have very, very few followers, except one person I still liked. That's interesting. Okay. So moving on to section 2. Oh wait, we're already on section 2. Okay. So I'm going to say for the next paragraph, the remains of past human-like beings or hominins indicate that the earliest human ancestors, first appearing in Africa, date to around 6 to 8 million years ago. The next paragraph. Environment refers not just to the obvious factors such as climate, but also to everything that has affected you. The physical activities you have engaged in, the foods you have eaten, and the nutrition these foods provide, exposure to infectious diseases, and the pathogenic viruses and bacteria that cause them. And other factors affecting health and well-being. That was long, I know. That was very long. Sorry if that was super boring. Which it was. I'm just going to say it right up front. That was boring. Okay. So it's a very, very long paragraph now. And we have a very, very big paragraph here. So I'm going to have to look through here. So I'm going to put down for this paragraph some biological anthropologists study living people, whereas others study extinct and living species of our nearest biological relatives, primates such as lemurs, monkeys, and apes. The next paragraph, biological anthropology as practice in the U.S. began in the first half of the 20th century, especially under the guidance of three key figures. Franz Boas, Alois Herdika, and Ernest Houghton. They trained most of the first generation of biological anthropologists during the first half of the 20th century. Next paragraph. And I found a really, really important detail that's worth noting is that biological anthropologists study all aspects of human biology, specifically looking at the evolution and variation of human beings and their living and past relatives. The next detail is that, from the next paragraph, the very nature of the discipline and the constant borrowing from other disciplines means that biological anthropologists practice an interdisciplinary science. Now on to section 3. And I think that a very obvious detail that's worth writing is that I know it's going to seem so simple, but human beings differ from other animals. Okay, moving on. Again, detachment. So then, moving to this paragraph here. And again, this is why I say detachment. Do not be so attached to the details. Just write something down, write anything down, and release attachment. That's going to be your very, very big thing. So when you're taking notes, let go. Let go. So, in this case, I'm talking about objective information. Subjective information, it may be very, very easy to put down the important things, not objective information. So, anyway. So, we are committed to biped. Listen, that's a new word. Walking on 2 feet. Okay, the next paragraph. Culture is a complex human characteristic that facilitates our survival by enabling us to adapt to different settings. The next paragraph. This is interesting. The material remains of past cultures go back, so I spelled that, hundreds of thousands of years to the first simple tool made from rocks. The next paragraph. Anthropologists and animal behaviorists have shown that human beings are not the only type of animal that has or can employ material culture. That's important, I think, because we're not the only ones. Here's the next paragraph. Hunting, speech, and dependence on domesticated foods appeared much later in human evolution than bipedalism, non-honing. Just gonna put chewing just to make things easier. Chewing. and complex material culture and tool use. Okay. Oh, this is very, very important. We are the only animal that communicates by talking. Next paragraph. This development. What development? Okay, you see what I mean? I'm going against my own advice here when it comes to detaching. This development led eventually to our current total reliance on domesticated plants and animals for food. Okay, getting through it easily and carefully. This is, by the way, the format of this live stream is going to be how they all will be, so they will be long. Okay, so okay. The next paragraph. The behaviors that are unique to humans, speech, tool use, and dependence on culture are also related to human intelligence. Next paragraph. Oh, I found it right there. It doesn't take that long to find. Social learning makes it possible for humans to accumulate an amazing amount of information over very long time periods. I'm just skip that next paragraph because that's not really saying anything. Like all other scientists, I'm on to section 4 now, the first paragraph of section 4. Like all other scientists, biological anthropologists carefully, my spelling is terrible, carefully and systematically observe and ask questions about the natural world around. Okay, science is a process, I'm on to the next paragraph now, is a process that provides new discoveries that connect our lives with the world we live. We're getting there, we're almost there. And I'm also think it's valuable to put in that, since I'm on the next page, the scientist develops a theory which is an explanation about why a natural phenomenon takes place. Butchered that. And then the next paragraph is super simple, it's very short. So the scientist uses observation, documentation, and testing to generate hypotheses and eventually to construct a theory based on those hypotheses. I'm going to put in the example that they list here for the next paragraph. The great English naturalist Charles Darwin, I'm not going to put his full name, Darwin developed the hypotheses that the origin of human bipedalism was linked to the shift from life in the trees to life on the ground. Okay, next paragraph now. The detail that I'm going to be extracting from this paragraph is that the physical shape and appearance of the hominins finger and toe bones indicate a lot of time spent in trees, holding on to branches and moving from limb to limb. Next paragraph now. Oh, this is important. Scientists develop new hypotheses as new findings are made. Simple enough and important enough. And right there, I didn't have any problem finding that. Next paragraph. A scientific law is a statement of irrefutable truth of some action or actions occurring in the natural world. Final paragraph. Okay, then it goes into the personal stuff. Okay. So this concludes the session 1 live stream. I'll be back for session 2. I don't know when, but plan on there being a session 2 live stream. We're gonna look at chapter 2. We're gonna do the same thing as we did on this live stream. Chapter 2 is evolution. We're going to read through it, and then we're going to take notes just like we did today. So that is it. Bye for now, everybody. Have a good day.